Buenas tardes a todas las personas que se están conectando en este momento. Hoy continuamos con nuestra semana de Australia. Hemos conocido, como ya saben, el sistema académico de este país. Hemos estado con diferentes universidades y el día de hoy nos acompañan diferentes representantes de Deakin University, de pues, las diferentes facultades de la universidad. El día de hoy nos estarán brindando información acerca de la oferta académica que tienen disponible, cómo pueden iniciar su postulación, qué opciones de financiación hay disponibles y también estarán hablando un poco del convenio que actualmente tienen con Colfuturo, el cual otorga un descuento del 25% en el valor de la matrícula. Ya más adelante nos van a contar específicamente. Tenemos dos estudiantes de la universidad, beneficiarias de Colfuturo. Si ustedes van teniendo dudas, preguntas acerca de lo que van exponiendo a lo largo de la presentación, pueden dejar sus preguntas en la parte inferior en el recuadro de Q&A y al final le vamos a dar respuesta a todas estas preguntas. Desde la firma del convenio hemos beneficiado a 7 personas con este descuento, entonces pues esperamos que toda la información que presentemos sea de gran utilidad y los invito a que nos sigan en nuestras redes sociales, en Instagram, en Facebook y en Twitter para que puedan estar conectados a todos los eventos que tenemos disponibles. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Thank you so much for joining us. You can start.
Thank you. Just a very quick presentation. Yo soy Gonzalo Pérez, soy el director para América Latina de Deakin University. Estoy basado en Uruguay. Viajo bastante seguido a Colombia. Es un honor presentarles a Wanti Wijaja, Associate Head of School de la Escuela de Educación, a George Aranda, Course Director del Master of Teaching de la Escuela de Educación, a Jonathan Robertson, Senior Lecturer, Deakin Business School, Juliana Pérez Tello, profesional del deporte colombiana, estudiante del máster en Business Sports Management y beneficiaria con futuro, y a María Bonilla, ex estudiante del MBA. Así que le presento a, vamos a hacer primero la parte de educación, después la parte de deportes, y después dejaremos lugares para preguntas. Professor Wanti, please, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gonzalo, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. So we will, George and I will be sharing the presentation, and we will introduce the School of Education and Studying Teaching at Deakin University. So I hope you can see the screen quite clearly. So why do you want to consider studying teaching? So this is a better time to become a teacher. So at Deakin, we are very proud about our history and our education and our colleagues here. So basically, if you join us, our School of Education is very well ranked in the world class. And we prepare our pre-service teachers to be classroom ready, and there's a lot of support in terms of professional experience. So our dedicated team of professional experienced staff actually place our pre-service teachers in schools. So you don't have to worry if you are going on your placement, you know, everything will be taken care of. So, and there is an extensive professional learning experience, and it's built on from the day you join Deakin. So from your first semester, you've already gained that hands-on practical learning experience at Deakin. So it's a little bit about our history. If you're not familiar with our university, Deakin is relatively quite young. So it was established in 1970s. It's very well known as a pioneer in distance education. Deakin is named after the Prime Minister, Alfred Deakin. It's a comprehensive university with more than 60,000 students, and we have a lot of students, international students, but also students who are studying in the cloud campus, which means that they are studying online. Excellence of teaching and research, we will talk a little bit more about that later on. And we always, try to develop all the new ways of developing and delivering our courses. So in terms of our campuses, we have 5 campuses. So the biggest one is in Melbourne, Burwood campus. we have two campuses at Geelong, one in Geelong One Falls, and the other one is at Geelong Waterfront Campus. And Jonathan might talk a little bit more about this as well later in his presentation. We also have a rural campus, which is about 3 hours from Melbourne. It's called Vulnerable Campus. And we also, what I mentioned earlier, we have a growing number of students who are studying in the cloud, especially also during the pandemic. So these are just some pictures to give you a little bit of an insight into our campuses. But if you Google our Deakin University, you'll be able to find a little bit more information about our campuses. So I mentioned earlier that we are very well ranked in terms of the university ranking, even though we are relatively quite young. So in the academic ranking of World University, Deakin is considered or ranked in the top 1%. So if you want to learn more in terms of our ranking in the School of Education, you can go to our website to learn more. So the other thing to mention here is to highlight that we have been getting, ranked as #1 university in Australia in the state of Victoria for student satisfaction for 11 years in a row. Our research is also very, very strong. So we've won a lot of grants, for example, from the Department of Education, as well as the category competitive grant, like Australian national grant. So that's possible because we have a very dedicated academic staff and strong research reputation. So we have a strategic research center called READY in our school. And I have a little bit more information if you are interested to learn more about that. So teaching is a rewarding career, and all of us who are involved in teaching and teacher education, we know that, it's a very fulfilling career. You get to actually interact and shape the future of our future generation, our children. So it's not an easy job, to be honest. It's a lot of challenging moments as well in teaching, but you're always encouraged to learn new things from your students, from your colleagues, and from your interactions, as well as from the policy. So so I'm pretty sure if you're attending this session, you have some interest in either teaching or sports education. So these are just some of the highlights from our previous students, but also some of our colleagues' research who won prestigious research grants from Australian Research Council. So just a few highlights, and one of our colleagues is a leading scholar in, for example, involved a lot of research in international education and informed the New Colombo plans, for instance. So I will hand over to George, who will introduce our Master of Teaching suite of courses. So George is one of the course director of Master of Teaching Primary, especially. But we invited him to talk today because he also completed the course himself before. So George, over to you. You'll be able to talk a little bit more and share your experience with our audience today. Thanks, George.
Thanks, Monty. Good morning, buenos dias. So what we're looking at today is the Master of Teaching course. And the Master of Teaching course is done in a certain way where there are a number of different streams, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the different streams that you can do. Oop, go back. Thanks, Monty. A number of different streams. And the beauty of the course is that we try and have all of our students do the kind of foundation, the beginning courses together. So even if you're doing a Master of Teaching Early Childhood or primary or secondary, you'll be working with other students learning in the same kind of way. And it's really useful because there are also streams that we'll talk about later on where two courses can come together, and learning in that way can be quite useful. Now, we try and prepare teachers to be classroom ready, which is why we have quite a number of days of placement that you'll be in at schools, more than 60 days in each course, depending on which course you're going to be doing. We make sure we have the latest research that informs the way that we teach these kind of practices, whether you're doing STEM or you're doing literacy or you're doing mathematics and those kind of things. We also try and get students involved in the community of the schools that they're attending, because it's really important to have an understanding of where your students are coming from. Now, there are 5 courses to choose from. As the slide indicates at the bottom, there are dual strands, single strands, and there is flexibility in the way that the courses are run. Next slide, Wanty. So there are 5 courses, and so ranging from early childhood being from year 3, 3 years old to 8 years old, primary school, which is 5, 6-year-old up to 12-year-old, secondary is 13 to 18. And then we also have combinations. So on the right-hand side, you'll see primary and early childhood. So if you're someone that sees yourself working with early childhood and primary, or you want that flexibility in your degree to be able to choose which area that you work with, you could do something like that. And there's also primary and secondary. So if you're someone that sees yourself working, you're not 100% sure, or you want the flexibility to work with different age ranges, you might think about doing the dual stream kind of courses. Thanks, Wanty. Now, there are the 5 courses will take 2 years on a full-time basis to complete, and they're done at the Burwood campus in a face-to-face kind of mode. You need to take into account the kind of degree you've done previously. So whether you've done a course having to do with science or business or those kind of things, they will be taken into account in terms of the specializations that you can do during your actual courses. You need to do a CASPER test, which looks at your kind of suitability, your aptitude for teaching and those kind of things. And on the bottom right there, you can see we start to look at the areas you may have done a minor. We look at major or a minor depending on your whether it's primary and secondary or secondary only. There's a range of specializations that you can do. So if you've got a background, maybe you've learned instruments before, you may choose to do an area looking at music or art or drama. Or if you've got some sort of experience with science like I do, you may look at how the science aspect can fit into your teaching degree. One of the things I always try and talk to my students about is when you're thinking of becoming a teacher, try and imagine what you think or what you hope your teaching experience will be. Do you see yourselves playing on the floor with students, using play-based learning strategies with quite young students? I've done research looking at B-bots, robots, working in early childhood. Is that the kind of thing that you see yourself doing? Or do you see yourself doing that kind of next level where you're maybe reading books to students, helping them learn the fundamentals of division and mathematics, or having kind of impassioned debates about sustainability and climate change and those kind of things where year 6 students might be involved. So think about what kind of areas and how you yourself becoming a teacher. Or at a secondary kind of level, it could be that you want those fierce arguments that you can get with students in their teens when they have lots of ideas that they're trying to wrestle with and unpack and those kind of things. Now, myself, I did the Master of Teaching Primary a number of years ago, and I had the great experience of working with a range of different kids. And Wanty, if you want to go to the next slide for me. Part of the amount of placement that we give you gives you really good connection with students. It gives you good insight into the range of students you're going to work with, their range of skills and abilities. I know when I did my placements, I worked with a lot of students who had autism, and that's something that's going to be coming up in your careers, no doubt. And it gave me great insight in how to manage students with certain kind of skills and certain kind of behaviors that are different to other students, but also at the same time to make sure you have experience of encouraging students in a different kind of way. So really think about the amount of placement and hands-on experience that you're going to get. Now, Emily here is one of our previous master's students, and I'll just quickly read that there. Throughout my teaching course, I participated in 90 days of placement in both rural and metropolitan settings. So it doesn't have to be just the city that you're working in. It can be more of a rural area, depending on where you want to be. These placements are honestly one of the most rewarding parts of the course, as you will put all of your classroom work and study into practice. Deakin also really supports its students whilst on placement, which really helped me building my confidence. And it's a great thing to get lots of exposure to students, so you get a good feel for what teaching will really be like. Thanks, Wanty. You're muted.
Sorry. Okay, thanks, George. So I'll continue with the Master of Teaching English to speakers of other languages, or in short, MTSOL. So this is another master degree program that is well received by international students. So I'll talk you through a little bit more information, as well as the MEd research by research, Master of Education by Research. So the Master of TESOL is only 1-year program. For international students, obviously, you have to be on campus at Burwood campus, but there's an option for cloud online delivery as well. So the Master of Education by Research is 2 years, and that's just a little bit of overall information. We have to go a little bit quickly today because of time, but we can answer your questions if you're interested. So the other course or the other research pathway, so Master by Research is obviously a research pathway. So if you're considering, for example, studying after you finish a master degree to do a PhD or a doctoral degree, that is a good master degree options, because you do need to have a substantial research component to be able to do your PhD. So I'll talk a little bit more about Deakin, the research in our School of Education. So recently we have this restructuring of our programs of research. So at the moment we have 6 different programs of research led by 2 different colleagues. So you can read that, you know, the programs of research are quite reflecting our kind of like research priority, but also you can see that the attention to, you know, innovative aspect, for example, the progressive nature of research in our school. So educating for sustainable and just digital societies, for example, there's a strong emphasis on that. So these are just some of the profile of our colleagues. If you are interested to read more, for example, if you're interested to learn what is George research, you can Google and find out, and go to the staff listing and find out a little bit more about George research and publications, and then try to fit in, you know, when you apply at Deakin, and if you're doing research, we encourage potential students to always go to our staff listing, staff profile, to match, kind of like to match, see if there is any alignment in your research interest with our staff research interests. I mentioned earlier about the READY. So READY is our research center that sits under the School of Education. And READY has 4 different research teams, and one of them is STEM education. So both George and I are part of the STEM education research teams, and we are part of READY. And the other research team is Learners in Digital World. So there is a big grant that is attached to, for example, that theme. And yeah, all of our colleagues here are very research active. Our research informs our teaching as well. So there's that close relationship between research and practice. So the other research center in our school is Center for Research and Assessment and Digital Learning. And these are some of the leading scholars in that Cradle Center. So Professor David Balch, Professor Margaret Ryan, and Associate Professor Rola Ajawi. What happened after you finish studying at Deakin and you are looking for a job? So at Deakin, we have this very dedicated team called Deakin Talent, and it's a award-winning team that really help our students with career advice and employment services. So if you're preparing to apply for a job, they can actually, you know, look at your job application and give you feedback and like resume and samples. And also, you know, you can actually speak to a career coach. So it's a very good service for students at Deakin. So when you come to us, there are also activities like orientation and getting started. We have this year we actually run at the open day, both virtual, that was already done, but then in August we have face-to-face open day as well, and there's a range of support services that are available. So I'll stop here and then I'll hand over to Gonzalo, I think the other colleague who will talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Wanti and George. I'm passing on straight to Jonathan, and then followed up by Juliana. So Jonathan, you share, right? Yes.
Yes, can you hear me? All good? I'd just like to welcome you all to our presentation today about sport management here at Deakin. My name is Jonathan Robertson and I am the course director of our Masters of Business in Sport Management. And I'll be presenting today with Maria, one of our students and also a Kolfortura student. And I'd like to thank Wendy for the great introduction and overview of Deakin, because I think what we'll do in this presentation is go into a little bit more detail about our program now that you have a bit more of a broader understanding about the university more broadly. Sport is embedded in the DNA of Deakin University. We're the #1 sports science school in the world. We're also the #6 sport-related subject university in the world. And we have the top sport management program at the postgraduate level in Australia. So there is a wide variety of expertise here. And I guess for this presentation, we'll run you a little bit more broadly about Melbourne first and what's coming up in Melbourne in the next 10 years. And then talk specifically about the program at the end of the 10 minutes before handing over to Maria to talk about the student experience. So Deakin is located in Melbourne, as Wendy took us through, and Melbourne is both one of the most livable cities in the world and one of the most well-known sports cities in the world. It's been the #1 sports city in the world for a number of years, until the pandemic, but essentially this is our sport precinct on the screen. It's called Melbourne Olympic Parks, and the big stadium on the right is the MCG. It's also in my background as well. The reason I show you this is Melbourne has an infrastructure like no other city in the world, where all our sport is really closely located. So the Bubbly Stadium here in the foreground is Amy Park. This is where the Australian Open is, and this river goes into a lake down here, and that's where the Formula 1 Grand Prix is in Australia. In the next 10 years, we have a number of major international events, as well as our regular events that you can either volunteer at or be a part of year on year in Melbourne. So you might have seen the Australian Open on your television screen. This occurs about 20 minutes from our main campus, with the city in the background, and is an annual event held in late January, early February each year. We also have the Grand Prix, which traditionally has been the start of the F1 international season, which is held in March each year. And we have a domestic competition called Australian Rules Football, of which around 10 professional football teams are located in Melbourne, and we have some of the highest per capita crowds attend these major events. So year on year, these 3 events and other events like a major horse race are held in Melbourne, and it's a really sporting culture that you can get to be a part of. In the coming years, Australia more generally has a number of major events. So this year we have the UCI Cycling Road Championships in Wollongong in New South Wales. We also have the International Women's Basketball World Cup in Sydney coming up this year. And next year we have the FIFA Women's World Cup that we're sharing with New Zealand. So Australia and New Zealand will co-host that in 2023. In 2026, Melbourne will host the Commonwealth Games, which is all the Commonwealth countries, so the former British colonies, coming together to compete in a major event, and that will actually be held out of Geelong, which is the city that Wendy introduced as a city that we have 2 campuses in Victoria. In 2027 and 29, we have the Rugby World Cup, and in 2032, Brisbane in the north of Australia was announced as the host of the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. So this broader context means that from a very strong base and a highly ranked and highly regarded program in Australia, you have an extra layer of engagement over the next 10 years where there is going to be a lot of activity here as you come into our program, and a lot of extra jobs jobs and recognition of what's happening in the sporting landscape on top of a very strong sporting infrastructure. For our Masters of Business Sport Management, all our classes in the sport management program are run out of this brand new building. It's our new law building here at Deakin. And we really base our sport management program on 4 pillars around trying to build a strong student community and student culture, getting you a job, getting you into the workforce, and we'll talk a little bit about sports grad in a couple of minutes. We have a lot of industry guests. So I know Maria was in an ethics class that I run in the first half of this year, and we had about 8 guest speakers come in and speak to us about various issues. And we have a bit of fun as well. We do some social games and social events and really try and build that student atmosphere on campus. From a more sort of program overview perspective, this is our team down the bottom. We have one of the largest faculty, so the largest number of staff that are specialized in sport management in the world. And we also have a couple of industry professionals. So Scott Field is one of our industry professionals who created a large company in Australia around learning to swim. And Campbell Jamieson was the former commercial director of the ICC, so the International Cricket Council, which is a massive international organization. He was very high up in that organization. What we generally offer, or we try and mix for you, is a combination of a world-class learning experience, as Wendy mentioned, bringing our innovative and impactful research into the classroom to make a difference and help your learning, and also a very strong focus on industry. So to give you an example, we have an advisory board, and that picture right at the start about Melbourne Olympic Parks, all that precinct, the operations manager of that precinct advises us on how to teach you about facility and events, for example. The structure of the course is basically broken down into 3 components. You do 2 units on straight business, so finance and economics. You do between 6 and 8 sport management specific units, so an introduction to sport management in Australia, an introduction to organisation behaviour and how to manage organisations, sport ethics and integrity, so issues of doping, match fixing, corruption, sport and the law, what legal systems and legal requirements you require, how to market major events and how to engage fans, how to govern sport organisations and sport bodies, and then also how to strategize and think about competitive advantage in the sport sector. On top of that, you can do a number of electives between 2 and 6, depending on how you enroll. And they can include a wide range of subjects from sport media and revenue generation, so broadcast rights, for example, to sport development, so how to get more people participating in youth sport, and facility and event management, so how to host major events, how to plan for major events, how to design facilities and operationally do major events, which sport is very famous for. What our program looks like in practice is this, and sorry, Maria, for putting a photo up there, but essentially this is our cohort. Oscar there in front of the Go Cats sign. We have a strategic relationship with the Cats Football Club, but we also do a range of simulations and engagement activities, and truly trying to make it a great student experience for you when you arrive. The second to last slide is about our sports grad relationship, and on top of Deakin Talent, which Wendy took us through, we have a relationship with Sports Grad and Ruben Ryan down here on your screen. Ruben was a former graduate of ours, and he basically helps you design and craft your resume, your CV, and apply for jobs and internships in our program. From our program into industry. They've been very successful in placing a number of students, and we have a number of relationships that we also work with to help you get started in the sport industry. They do have a really good podcast, so if you'd like to look up Sports Grad online, you can start to hear about what they do and maybe plan for your career in sport. So that's it from me. If you have any questions, please feel free to email either myself or Gonzalo, and there's a link to our course here as well. So if you'd like to screenshot this slide and look up more information about the course, please feel free to do so. And thanks for joining in. I will hand over to Maria now, I believe.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Listo, entonces yo voy a presentar en español. Mi pantalla se trabó. ¿Me escuchan?
Sí.
Te escuchamos, sí.
Bueno, yo estoy haciendo mi maestría en administración. ¿Ven mi pantalla?
No.
No. No te preocupes, cuéntanos lo que estás haciendo, lo que estás trabajando,
Y
cómo ha
estoy
sido hasta ahora.
ahorita en Melbourne, en Australia. Como dijo Jonathan, es un país muy atractivo para un estudiante como yo por el estilo de vida que tiene. Muchas actividades para hacer al aire libre, facilita el bienestar. La visa de estudiante permite trabajar. Bueno, la industria deportiva es muy llamativa, de la cual uno aprende todo el tiempo. En efecto, es una de las industrias más desarrolladas a nivel mundial y esto se ve reflejado en sus resultados como potencia mundial. Casi que en todas las disciplinas deportivas uno encuentra a un australiano en el top 10. Especialmente acá en Melbourne, es una ciudad cosmopolita que desde el primer momento deja ver esa influencia internacional, tiene una influencia especialmente asiática, pero a la vez uno encuentra una comunidad europea y latina muy, muy fuerte. Incluso hay restaurantes colombianos, así que a uno nunca le va a hacer falta la arepa. La ciudad pareciera estar diseñada para los estudiantes, para el extranjero. Principalmente la movilidad es muy sencilla, a pesar de que el sentido de la circulación cambia. A comparación de Colombia, los carros se manejan en el lado derecho y van por el lado izquierdo. El servicio público es buenísimo, trenes, tranvías, buses, patinetas eléctricas. Algunos compañeros compraron carro de bajo costo, $3,000, $4,000, pero bueno, yo a título personal tengo una bicicleta y con eso me muevo por todos lados. Hay caminos para bicicletas a través de toda la ciudad y se comparte con los carros. Todo es como muy amigable con el ciclista y eso a mí me ha parecido muy chévere. ¿Qué más les cuento? Particularmente de Melbourne, como lo dijo Jonathan, es la casa de innumerables eventos deportivos. Todas las semanas está pasando algo increíble, eventos de talla mundial. Ya como espectadora pude estar en el Grand Prix de la Fórmula 1, estaban triatlones, competencias de fútbol, carreras de todas las distancias, maratones, 5K, 10K, natación, clavados, water ski, wakeboard, aprendiendo de deportes que también para mí eran un poco ajenos, no porque no los conociera, sino porque en Colombia no tienen mayor participación, por ejemplo, cricket, rugby, netball. Acá hay un deporte que se llama, bueno, el fútbol australiano, que es masivo. Ahorita prácticamente que todos los fines de semana estoy yendo al MCG, que es el estadio que les contó Jonathan, y se aprende muchísimo todo el tiempo de marketing, manejo de escenarios, desarrollo de eventos, uso de recursos. Es buenísimo. Para continuar, y ya de la universidad en específico, solo tengo adjetivos positivos. Yo estoy viviendo en el campus y los apartamentos son geniales, cuentan con todos los servicios, tienen televisor, nevera, las cocinas son buenísimas, el internet siempre estable, hacen actividades para conocer a gente todo el tiempo, salidas a museos, zoológicos, noches de comida, cine, noche de juegos. Literalmente no me ha hecho falta nada, siempre tengo todo. Y de la universidad en general tengo que decir que todos los funcionarios, todos se han portado muy bien conmigo, todos son atentos, quieren colaborar de la mejor manera, si no te pueden solucionar algo en el momento te tratan de ayudar de otra forma o buscar quién es la persona más idónea para darle solución a cualquier cosa que a uno le surja. Los canales de comunicación son buenísimos, la respuesta es casi inmediata, si no te dan una cita. La biblioteca también es increíble, bases de datos son increíbles, si no hay un libro te lo consiguen o lo traen de otra sede. El gimnasio también es buenísimo, máquinas de punta, de fuerza, cardio, flexibilidad, absolutamente todo. Los salones son hermosos, luz por todos lados, tecnología de punta, computadores en cada una de las mesas, espacios para estudiar en todas partes, todo el tiempo. En la residencia, incluso en cada uno de los pisos hay salones para estudiar, salas individuales, grupales, con computador, con proyector, televisores, tableros, con marcadores, absolutamente todo. Y ya específicamente del máster, yo tengo que decir que estoy viviendo un sueño. Desde mi pregrado en Ciencias del Deporte me empecé a enfocar en el sector administrativo del deporte y Deakin definitivamente me está dando la oportunidad de crecer y de desarrollar mis capacidades de liderazgo y entender mejor esta industria y el rol de los administradores deportivos, pensar en los problemas contemporáneos del deporte, pero también en el futuro del deporte y los diferentes enfoques desde las leyes, desde la ética, desde el mercadeo, desde la parte financiera, recursos, eventos, buscar las soluciones pertinentes a lo que se va a afrontar. Yo ya completé mi primer año y sinceramente me siento en el camino correcto, siento la ambición para continuar y culminar mis estudios con éxito. Estoy convencida de que este programa, por ser uno de los mejores del mundo y tener esta perspectiva internacional, me va a ayudar a alcanzar mis futuras metas en Colombia o a nivel internacional. El programa y Deakin también me están dando todas las herramientas para alcanzar mi potencial. No hay nada que me haga sentir que estoy quedada. Las clases siempre tienen información relevante, las plataformas de la universidad también son buenísimas, se puede acceder a toda la información todo el tiempo, revisarlas las veces que uno quiere, si a uno le quedó alguna duda de la clase puede volver a revisar y los profesores son increíbles, se nota que saben muchísimo, manejan muy bien los temas. Hasta el momento no he tenido ningún profesor de los que lee diapositivas, que es algo de lo que yo siempre me he quejado, que si a uno le van a leer diapositivas, pues que las manden y uno las ve después, pero acá es todo lo contrario. Las explican, profundizan, dan ejemplos. De verdad que yo me les quito el sombrero, son de admirar y siempre están dispuestos a responder cualquier cosa, cualquier pregunta, escuchar las intervenciones. Y bueno, una última cosa muy especial, antes de manera online y ahorita ya de manera presencial, es ese trato como diferenciado de parte de los profesores y del personal. Uno siempre siente como esa cercanía, es muy personal, saben quién soy yo, de dónde vengo, quieren saber cómo estoy, cómo me pueden ayudar si es posible. Y bueno, yo como estudiante internacional lo valoro muchísimo, son claros con toda la información, son muy atentos y geniales. Entonces, pues nada, esto para mí ha sido una gran oportunidad, gracias también pues a Colfuturo para alcanzar lo que yo quiero. Requiere disciplina, pero definitivamente vale la pena y puede que haya algunas desventajas y esté la barrera del idioma, pero si uno está motivado y realmente lo quiere, todo es posible e invitarlos a alcanzar sus sueños. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Juliana. Thank you, George. Thank you, Wendy. Wendy. Thank you, Jonathan. Una última aclaración antes de abrir a preguntas. El acuerdo que tiene Deakin con Colfuturo, además del descuento a los beneficiarios, que ya habló Alejandra, el 25%, incluye hasta 20 semanas de inglés en nuestro centro de inglés para los estudiantes que necesiten mejorar el nivel de inglés antes de comenzar el máster, cualquiera de los máster que pueden elegir. Hoy presentamos los máster de educación y el máster of Sports Business, el máster of Business Sports Science, pero los beneficios de Deakin para los beneficiarios de Colfuturo son en todas las maestrías. Alejandra, if there are any questions, we can take them in Spanish, or I can translate for the speakers.
Muchas gracias. Pues en este momento no tenemos preguntas. Invito a las personas que comiencen a hacer sus preguntas. Tenemos aquí en el recuadro inferior de Q&A, pueden comenzar a hacer sus preguntas. Mientras tanto, pues me gustaría preguntarle a María pues, algunas recomendaciones que ella como estudiante beneficiaria de Colfuturo le puede dar a los beneficiarios, a las personas que están conectadas en este momento mientras empiezan a llegar otras preguntas.
María Juliana.
María Bonilla, perdón.
Bueno, pero tal vez para hablar de los beneficios de Colfuturo, creo que sí, Juli sería más apropiada, que ella realmente es la beneficiaria de Colfuturo.
Ok.
A ti, Juliana, a ti te tocó difícil porque empezaste en pandemia, online, remoto, y después seguiste heroica.
Bueno, no, recomendaciones es tener la disciplina y quererlo, porque es parte como del crecimiento profesional y el motivo para volver también. Yo tengo ese reto personal de volver a Colombia y aportar a la industria deportiva. Hay mucho por hacer allá y yo siento que acá estoy viviendo en el futuro del deporte y que allá voy a llegar con nuevas ideas y cambiar muchas cosas, generar cambio.
Así sea. Julián nos pregunta en el chat que si es posible ampliar la información sobre el programa de idiomas.
Sí, a ver, Deakin tiene una escuela de inglés, un instituto de inglés, Deakin University English Language Institute, está basado en Melbourne, en el edificio al lado del Business School, y hacemos programas de inglés general o inglés académico, English for Academic Purposes. Es un pathway para entrar a los masters en Deakin, o sea, hacemos una evaluación basada sobre un certificado IELTS o TOEFL o nuestro propio examen de placement, y les podemos decir, ok, para entrar a un máster van a necesitar 5, 10, 15, 20 semanas de inglés en nuestro instituto de inglés. Para beneficiarios de Colfuturo, esas semanas hasta 20 semanas son gratuitas, están incluidas en el acuerdo. Son cursos de 5 horas por día, 5 días a la semana, en bloques de 5 semanas. Más o menos un bloque de 5 semanas es, si uno lo hace bien, es ir mejorando como medio punto IELTS cada bloque. María Bonilla lo hizo antes de hacer su MBA. y además trabajó después como estudiante en Dueli, cuando yo trabajaba en el máster.
Sí, eso sí, ahí sí tuve toda la experiencia. Hice 10 semanas antes de empezar mi MBA y luego hice el MBA por 2 años y en ese momento teníamos un programa que era el de los líderes para estudiantes que una vez hubiesen terminado su curso de inglés y continuasen haciendo el pregrado o posgrado en la universidad, podíamos, digamos, unirnos a un grupo y trabajar apoyando a los otros estudiantes internacionales y adicionalmente yo trabajé en el Instituto de Idiomas donde vienen pues estudiantes internacionales de casi que todas partes del mundo a mejorar su nivel de inglés antes de entrar. Realmente yo siempre digo que así ya un estudiante digamos, tenga el nivel de inglés, siempre es muy bueno hacer por lo menos 10 semanas o 5 o 10 semanas, 1 o 2 niveles de inglés, porque en esos cursos, como tienen el objetivo académico, nos enseñan siempre cómo hacer una presentación, cómo hacer una investigación, cómo se deben desarrollar después los puntos en los ensayos, y creo que ya uno entra un poco más preparado a la universidad, sobre todo cuando, por ejemplo, las personas, como en mi caso, ya habíamos terminado la universidad hace un buen tiempo y uno está como desactualizado de lo que es estudiar, volver a tomar el ritmo cuesta un poco y obviamente en el curso de inglés nos enseñan, Julián ahorita nos contaba las bases de datos que hay en la biblioteca y todo eso afortunadamente me lo enseñaron a hacer en el curso de inglés, entonces como que ya ese proceso fue mucho más fácil y ya pude concentrarme un poco más en la parte académica. El MBA es un poquito de todo, no es como, digamos, ahorita estábamos hablando de deportes o de educación, el MBA es un poquito de todo, entonces economía, recursos humanos, marketing, entonces siempre es un reto, cada persona viene de un background diferente, yo no tenía un background ni de finanzas ni nada por el estilo, entonces tuve que pues enfocar mi fuerza en dedicarle muchas horas, pero como Juli lo mencionaba, la universidad tiene todas las facilidades para los estudiantes internacionales y que uno no se quede atrás, ¿sí? O sea, obviamente hay áreas que a uno le quedan un poquito más difíciles que otras, a mí de repente se me facilita más lo teórico, entonces tuve que dedicarle muchísimo esfuerzo a todos los temas numéricos, pero la universidad, vuelvo y digo, tiene todas las facilidades para darle a uno ese empujón y que uno pueda salir adelante.
Muchas gracias. Hay una pregunta muy recurrente entre los estudiantes cuando nosotros tenemos consejerías académicas y es sobre el tiempo de preparación. Ustedes que ya vivieron esa experiencia, Juliana que la está viviendo en este momento, ¿con qué tiempo de preparación ustedes pueden decirle a los estudiantes que comiencen a postularse a la universidad, comiencen a hacer todo estos, preparar los requisitos a corto plazo, largo plazo, ¿qué pueden recomendarle?
Bueno, yo creo que eso depende un poco como del nivel de maduración, vamos a decirlo, de cada estudiante. Hay estudiantes que dicen que están como en la etapa de yo me quiero ir, pero todavía no sé qué quiero estudiar o no sé a dónde, como hay estudiantes que dicen, sí, yo ya tengo mucho más claro a dónde quiero ir, qué voy a estudiar y cómo lo voy a hacer. Entonces depende mucho la etapa en la que cada persona esté, ¿sí? O sí, yo quiero ir, pero todavía no tengo los recursos económicos, entonces voy a buscar una beca. O, ¿sabes? Creo que depende mucho, o sea, digamos que yo creo que lo normal es que la gente empiece a hacer como este tipo de averiguaciones por lo menos 1 o inclusive 2 años antes, como para ver qué opciones, qué país, qué programa, pero una vez como que ya tienen la idea de qué es lo que quieren, yo creo que en cuestión de 6 meses es como el tiempo para organizar papeles, organizar visa, organizar temas financieros, pero sí, depende la etapa en que cada uno esté.
Sí, comparto la misma idea. Yo personalmente ya conocía el proceso de Colfuturo y tenía muy claro que quería hacer o enfocarme en la administración deportiva. Entonces, En diciembre del 2018 yo me senté a buscar las universidades que tenían los mejores programas, a buscar los países que me llamaban más la atención y fue tema de un mes de sentarme a escribir mi ensayo, a enfocarme en lo que quería compartir y ya a inicios de febrero del 2019 pude subir mi aplicación.
Listo, gracias,
Y después vino
Carolina. Dime, dale.
No, digo que después vino la pandemia y todo se postergó un poquito, pero
Ujú.
empezaste.
Que es lo importante. Aquí tenemos otra pregunta de Carolina. Dice, ¿se requiere algún promedio académico mínimo para poder aplicar a Colfuturo? Para aplicar a Colfuturo, no. Igual tienes que tener en cuenta que el 37% del proceso de selección es tu promedio académico. Aunque nosotros no tengamos definido algún promedio específico, tienes que tener en cuenta eso y tú vas a competir con los de tu área de estudio. Entonces, pues si los de tu área de estudio tienen un promedio pues más alto, pues ahí vas a tener algún tipo de desventaja que puedes complementar con la calidad del programa. Entonces, no tenemos ningún requisito, no significa que si tienes un promedio bajo no vas a poder ser beneficiario de Colfuturo, pero vas a tener que saber jugar con los porcentajes. No sé si para la universidad tienen algún promedio mínimo, tienen...
No, generalmente digo, los estudiantes que postulan están digo, de 4 para arriba, en el promedio de este sistema colombiano. Obviamente, como tú dijiste, el peso en el Colfuturo es importante, entonces para ser beneficiario de Colfuturo eso es algo determinante, no tanto para ser aceptados dentro de la universidad, sino para la parte beca. Maybe since we're talking about admissions and timing and how you apply, maybe George, you want to talk briefly about how do you apply to a Master's of Teaching, Master of TESOL, and maybe Jonathan afterwards, just some guidelines about what's interesting in terms of the application process to the Master of Business Science.
Yeah, thanks, Gonzalo. I'll start, and I think George can add more details about Master of Teaching. So I think there are different admission processes. Like, obviously, we have Master of Teaching, which has a teaching qualification, and you have to go through placement. So that's why George talked earlier about the Casper test, because any of teaching qualification, we have the government require potential students to actually have a kind of like a task to assess their not just their academic attributes, but their sort of like teaching attributes, like, you know, attributes that's non-academic but related to teaching. For example, teamwork, problem-solving skills, ethical skills and things like that. So that is introduced quite recently, like I don't know how many years ago, but the Casper test is an additional test. But in general, I think for admission purposes, we will look at your previous degree, like the GPA or the grade point average of your bachelor degree. And I think usually 65% or above in general, or for like a PhD, obviously, I think has to be 70 and above to be competitive. And for a PhD, usually, you know, if you have publications like journal publication or conference publications, that will look favorable in your application. And I think alignment with the research interest of Deakin staff is another aspect. So that's for the research degree, and TESOL has a different requirement. But I'll hand over to George to talk a little bit about MTeach entry requirements and admission.
Thanks for that, Wanty. So like Wanty was saying, if you've got previous background in different areas, your first degree, those kind of things will be taken into account in terms of the specializations that you can do later down the track. Also, if you've done previous, maybe you've been a teacher aide, or you've had some sort of experience, those kind of things can be counted towards recognition of prior learning, but it's there's more weight to what you've actually studied. So maybe if you've done another degree that has to do with some aspects of education, those things can be counted towards some of the units that you may choose to do. Now, I do know, as Wanti was saying, that there is the CASPER test, and the CASPER is, don't worry too much, it's more about filling out a form, just talking about your previous experiences and the kinds of things that will be suited towards an education kind of background. The main thing is I think we only have one intake per year, so it's good to have a look at the end of this year to see what kind of requirements that you may need to organize in that sense. It'll also give you kind of an idea of the IELTS score that you need to get into the course as well, which is quite important. I had to jog my memory for those to answer the question. So I've put, I'll try and put something in the chat window, a link, so you can start to see the kind of requirements that we need for the course. And so as I'm looking at the website now, applications for next year open in August. So it's good to start getting your things organized so you'll be able to apply for the degree successfully. Okay.
Would you like me to speak to the Master of Business Sport Management, Gonzalo?
If you can give us some insights about how to apply, what's interesting for the faculty, for the students.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll put the link in the chat so everyone can follow up if they wish. But essentially, our master's entry requirements is a bachelor degree in a related discipline or in any discipline, and IELTS of about 6.5 or above is the requirements for postgraduate entry into the course. In terms of the design of the course, it is a 2-year master's, so you have a longer time to kind of prepare and getting into the course, and it's a little bit different in that respect to the Masters of Teaching, which is a slightly different area. And I guess for us, if you have any questions, it's probably the link in the chat is the first place to look at around the entry requirements and specifically how to apply and the process of applying. But if you have any general questions, first to Gonzalo and then also to me, we can follow up with you straight after.
Creo que estamos terminando. Thanks, Wanti, Jonathan, and George. I think estamos terminando, ¿no, Alejandra? Quería solo hacer un agradecimiento general con futuro por el partnership con Deakin, que nos llena de orgullo, por la posibilidad que le dan a estudiantes de participar en la educación australiana o en Deakin. Agradecer a los profesores. Acordarles además una cosa que no dijimos al principio, aunque Juliana un poco lo mencionó. En Australia con visa de estudiante se puede trabajar. En este momento es full time, pero normalmente es part time, son 20 horas por semana. Se puede trabajar en vacaciones y uno se puede quedar con, hasta 3 años después con visa de trabajo. Y que el futuro acepta, prevé también eso como para sus beneficiarios. Es una gran oportunidad de estudiar en una universidad a nivel mundial, trabajar en una, sobre todo en las áreas de educación y deportes en un país a primer nivel, y después obviamente volver y seguir trabajando en Colombia. Muchas gracias. Acá atrás están mis contactos. Encantado de responder a cualquier pregunta. Gracias, Alejandra. Gracias por el futuro. Thank you, everybody.
Muchas gracias, Gonzalo. Thank you so much for your time, for your presentation. En los próximos días estaremos enviando esta grabación. Si ustedes quieren nuevamente repasar algo de lo que dijeron, pues lo pueden hacer, y pues ahí están los datos de contacto de Gonzalo si necesitan alguna cosa adicional. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.